There's a quiet habit most of us carry that we rarely question. We scroll through someone else's success and feel a subtle tightening in our chest. We hear about a friend's promotion and instantly measure our own progress. We see a stranger's relationship, body, home, confidence, and without even deciding to, we compare. The psychology of why we compare ourselves to everyone isn't about vanity. It's about survival, identity, and belonging. Comparison is deeply human, but when it becomes constant, it slowly erodes our sense of self. To understand why we do it, we have to go back to our earliest wiring. Human beings evolved in tribes. Survival depended on our position within the group. Were we contributing enough? Were we accepted? Were we falling behind in status or skill? Being excluded from the tribe once meant real danger. So our brains developed a scanning mechanism, an internal radar that tracks where we stand in relation to others. This radar still exists. It activates automatically. When you walk into a room, part of your mind assesses who is more confident, more attractive, more accomplished, more socially connected. This process often happens beneath awareness. You don't consciously decide to rank yourself. Your brain does it in milliseconds. Psychologists call this social comparison theory, the idea that we determine our own worth and abilities by evaluating ourselves against others. As children, this mechanism is especially strong. If you were praised only when you performed well compared to classmates, your brain learned that worth equals relative superiority. If siblings were compared in front of you, your nervous system learned that love may depend on outperforming someone else. Over time, comparison becomes less about information and more about identity. It starts shaping how you see yourself. There are two primary directions comparison moves: upward and downward. Upward comparison happens when you measure yourself against someone you perceive as ahead. It can be motivating in healthy doses, but often it becomes self-punishing. You focus on what they have that you don't. Their highlight reel becomes your evidence of inadequacy. Downward comparison, on the other hand, is when you measure yourself against someone you perceive as behind. It can temporarily soothe insecurity. You feel relief, at least, I'm doing better than that. But this relief is fragile. It doesn't build self-worth. It just postpones insecurity. At its core, comparison is about uncertainty. When you're unsure of your value, your brain looks outward for confirmation. If you had consistent emotional validation growing up, if your efforts were appreciated regardless of outcome, you're more likely to have an internal sense of worth. But if validation was inconsistent, competitive, or conditional, comparison becomes your measuring stick. In adulthood, this pattern intensifies in environments designed to provoke comparison. Social media is a prime example. It presents curated lives, filtered success, edited confidence. Your brain processes these images as social data. It doesn't instinctively remember that this is a highlight reel. It simply registers. Others are ahead. What makes comparison particularly painful is that it often targets areas tied to identity: career, appearance, relationships, intelligence. These aren't minor traits. They are core elements of how we define ourselves. When we feel behind in these areas, it threatens our sense of belonging. There's also a deeper emotional layer. Comparison can mask fear. Fear that you are not enough. Fear that you will never catch up. Fear that your timeline is wrong. When someone your age achieves something you haven't, it can activate panic. Not because their success harms you, but because it challenges your narrative about where you should be. Notice the word should. Comparison thrives on unexamined expectations. By a certain age, I should be married. I should earn more. I should look a certain way. These expectations are often absorbed unconsciously from family, culture, or peers. When reality doesn't align, comparison sharpens. Comparison also becomes addictive because it creates emotional intensity. The spike of envy, the rush of motivation, the drop of shame, these activate stress hormones and reward circuits. Your nervous system becomes used to this cycle. It's uncomfortable, but familiar. Familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. even when it hurts. One of the most damaging effects of chronic comparison is that it distorts perception. You see others in two dimensions, successful or failing, while you experience yourself in full complexity. You compare your behind-the-scenes struggles to someone else's polished outcomes. That imbalance guarantees dissatisfaction. Over time, constant comparison chips away at authenticity. You may start making decisions not based on desire, but based on optics, choosing a career path because it looks impressive, pursuing milestones because others have them, dressing, speaking, or presenting yourself in ways that align with trends rather than truth. This creates an internal split. Outwardly, you may look accomplished. Inwardly, you may feel disconnected. Because the life you're building isn't rooted in self-understanding. It's rooted in reaction. Comparison also quietly affects relationships. It can turn friends into competitors. Instead of celebrating their wins, you feel threatened. Instead of sharing struggles, you hide them. This isolation reinforces the belief that everyone else is ahead. But here's something crucial. Comparison itself is not the enemy. It's information. It reveals what you value. If you feel envy toward someone's creative career, that envy may be pointing to a suppressed desire. If you compare yourself to someone's emotional stability, it may signal longing for inner peace. The problem isn't the initial comparison. It's the interpretation. Instead of asking, "What does this say about my worth?" you can ask, "What does this reveal about what I want?" There's a powerful shift that happens when you move from self-judgment to curiosity. Envy becomes data. Insecurity becomes insight. You begin to see comparison not as proof of inadequacy, but as a mirror reflecting unmet needs or unexplored aspirations. Another important layer is self-concept clarity. When you have a stable understanding of who you are, your values, strengths, limits, comparison loses intensity. You're less likely to feel destabilized by someone else's path because you're anchored in your own. Developing this clarity requires slowing down, asking difficult questions. What actually matters to me? What kind of life feels meaningful? If no one were watching, what would I pursue? These questions separate inherited expectations from authentic desire. There's also an emotional practice involved. Self-comparing instead of shaming yourself for it. Acknowledge it gently. "Of course I am comparing, my brain is wired for this." Then add kindness. "But my worth isn't determined by someone else's timeline." Self-compassion reduces the threat response. When you treat yourself with understanding rather than criticism, your nervous system relaxes. You're less reactive, more reflective. It's also helpful to recognize that growth isn't linear. Life unfolds in seasons. Someone may excel in career early and struggle in relationships later. Another may build emotional depth while financial success comes slowly. You rarely see the full arc of someone else's journey. You see fragments. The mind loves ranking because ranking feels concrete. It simplifies complexity. But human lives are multidimensional. Success in one area does not equal fulfillment in all. If comparison has become constant in your life, consider creating intentional boundaries. Limit exposure to triggers. Curate your environment. Surround yourself with conversations that prioritize authenticity over performance. Pay attention to how certain spaces make you feel expanded or diminished. Most importantly, remember that comparison often arises when you've drifted away from your own internal compass. Reconnection happens through small, consistent acts of self-alignment. Doing one thing daily that reflects your values. Celebrating progress that no one else sees. Measuring growth against your past self instead of someone else's present. You are not late. You are not behind. You are on a path shaped by experiences, strengths, wounds, and timing that are uniquely yours. Comparison cannot account for that complexity. And perhaps the most freeing realization is this: there will always be someone ahead of you in something, and someone behind you in something else. The race is infinite, but fulfillment is not found in ranking. It's found in alignment. When you begin to value authenticity over comparison, something shifts. The pressure softens, the urgency fades. You start building a life that fits you, not one that competes. It's okay that your brain compares. It's human, but But you are not obligated to believe every comparison it generates. With awareness, compassion, and clarity, you can transform comparison from a source of shame into a guide for growth. And in doing so, you slowly return to something steadier than status, self-trust. And that is a place no comparison can take away.